Hey, church family, it's Jordan, and I'm here with our Monday morning devotional. I'm recording this just a little bit after our prayer service together on Sunday evening, and it was a really amazing and profound time. We had some words of knowledge that were shared. There was healing that occurred. There was just the ministry of the Holy Spirit really present. And it was just very, very encouraging to be a part of. And join us in that. If you have yet to show up for one of those, please do. There are many opportunities for us to be praying together. We have some morning prayer services on Monday and Tuesday, I believe. We have youth, we have Celebrate Recovery on Wednesday night. We are kicking off midweek. There's going to be a special group in that that midweek quarter, just focused on prayer and intercession and seeking revival in parallel to what we are talking about on our Sunday morning gathering. So there really is just sort of endless opportunities for you to pray, which is a really amazing thing. And you can be prayed for, you can be prayed with, you can pray with people alongside other people. And again, we just have seen God moving through those prayers. So would encourage you to join us for that. Now, a special time of prayer, which we have talked about several times now, and just to reiterate, this Thursday after midweek, we'll have dinner together at midweek like we always do. But we're asking that you join us in a time of fasting and prayer Thursday night after midweek, all the way through Sunday service. And then we'll break the fast after our Sunday gathering. You can do that with your family at home. We can do that in groups. If you want to go out to lunch with someone, want to have someone over for lunch, we encourage all of those things. I would really encourage you to consider whoever it is that you are joining with in that fast. So if you're with your family and you're doing this with a spouse or with your kids, consider breaking that fast with them. If you're doing this with friends or doing with other members of our church family, consider breaking fast with them. Share some of the things that God has put on your hearts during that time. Really key for fasting. Give up something that matters to you, something that is important, something that you rely on, you trust in, you invest into, something that in some ways you look to as a substitute for giving you life. For some of us, fasting from food is a big deal. For some of us, it is not. And so really consider what you might fast from. In a way that there is a meaningful reflection back to God with that extra time and with that sacrifice. And so I would really encourage you to do that. Now, I want to jump into a devotional, again, continuing in this About God series, but in some ways developing it into a parallel with what we're talking about in our revival, our Hunger and Thirst series on Sunday morning. Dan talked this morning about how we are a people of the covenant. We're sort of a part of this extended family, this extended covenant promise that God gave to Abraham. And that is very true. And one of the amazing things about it is that we are actually a people of a better covenant. As Dan talked about, there is this history throughout the Bible where people hear from God. God ministers to them. He delivers them from their enemies. They reach this pinnacle point in their time and in their season, and then they get comfortable and they sort of lose track of their identity as God's people. They cease to think of themselves first and foremost as the people of God and begin to view themselves in the context of the people around them. They begin to look at various idols. They fall under the cultural influence of others. Inevitably, that leads to a humbling as they are pulled away from God, as they pursue things other than God. God either humbles them directly or he allows them to be humbled, and then that causes them to cry out, and then they return to this point where God delivers them. And ultimately, one of the great promises we have is that we are part of a better covenant. And I want to read to you from Hebrews 8. And we're going to start with verse 6, and then we're going to continue all the way through verse 12. Verse 6 through 12, Hebrews 8. But as it is, Christ has obtained a ministry that is a much more excellent one than the old covenant. But as it is, Christ has obtained a ministry that is as much more excellent than the old as the covenant he mediates is better, since it is enacted on better promises. For if that first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no occasion to look for a second. So what he's saying is Christ is now the minister of this better covenant. And he calls out that there sort of is this fundamental flaw in the first covenant, the one that was given by God, commanded by God for the people of Israel, for Abraham initially, and then for the people of Israel. And he says there's a fault in it. And then he says because there was a fault in it, there was a need for a second one. And so here's what he goes on to sort of clarify what that fault is. Verse 6. For he finds fault with them when he says, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will establish a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them out by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, for they did not continue in my covenant, and so I showed no concern for them, declares the Lord. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, declares the Lord, I will put my laws into their minds and write them on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people, and they shall not teach, each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they all shall know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will be merciful towards their iniquities, and I'll remember their sins no more. So here's the improved covenant that we receive as part of the work of Jesus Christ and the adoption that we receive into the covenant family. We essentially have sort of twofold benefit. In Hebrews, he says that God says, I should make sure that's really clear, God says he's going to write on our hearts and minds the law, the law of life. And so that we as a people are no longer reliant on sort of this word of mouth oral tradition that the Israelites had, where they sort of had synagogue and they had temple and all these things, and that was the way you sort of ingrained into people what the word of God said and what his law of life was for them. But God says that he will actually write on our minds and on our hearts. And as a result of that, there won't be sort of this dependency on this sort of societal correction that we had through the Old Testament. And there's sort of this added benefit, which goes back to last week's About God devotional video. He talks about his mercy, forgetting and forgiving and relieving us of the consequence of our iniquities and of our sin. That is an amazing promise. And so my encouragement to you today, as you look at this week, as you sort of ponder this fast that we have coming up, as you begin to pray more earnestly, I would say first, humble yourself and acknowledge your need for God's life-giving promise, the Spirit, the helper that we have. Reflect on that. Reflect on the ways in which you need his help. Express that through prayer. This is the promise of God for your life. And as Dan said, God is always faithful to keep his portion of the covenant. And so rely on his word when you need it. Rely on his word and his promises as you look at what is going on in your life and around you. Now, secondly, from that, I would certainly encourage you to keep in mind the benefit of God's mercy, the benefit of God's grace, but don't forget the fact that we are supposed to be a people who are being led to sanctification. One of the things that gets in the way of us experiencing the life that God would have for us is the fact that we are unfaithful. We worship idols. We allow our attentions to be drawn elsewhere, so that we no longer are seeking the care and protection and provision of our Father in heaven. So that's the second thought. Don't allow the mercies and grace part of this covenant to sort of eclipse the fact that we are supposed to have this law of life written upon our hearts and our minds through the work of the Holy Spirit. Listen to the prompting of the Holy Spirit in your life. And see if that does not help you be delivered into more life. If you don't see by following the leading of the Spirit, if you don't see the work of the Holy Spirit in your life leading you into more life, I really think you will, rather than sort of depending on either self-regulation, religious practice, even sort of guilt and shame. That's not what the Spirit is leading us towards. He's leading us to a place of life. And so I would challenge you with that as well. Do seek the holiness of God, but do also depend on the work of God, because that ultimately is what makes this covenant better. It is the fulfillment of the covenant for us by God that makes this the better covenant. All right, that's it for our Monday devotion. I pray that you have a wonderful week. I look forward to being with you on Thursday for midweek. We have a couple of amazing classes. We've got our parenting class. We have a time of teaching with Dan on self-worth. There'll be a video series. Albie is leading another one for our teens and our students. And then we also have that great sort of time of prayer and reflection on our revival series that we're going through. And again, I want to refer to this as a season or a time. We want to be revived and brought back to life. I don't want this to just be another series. So hopefully we're all together for that, and you'll join us in the fast and the prayer that will follow. Bye, everyone.